there's a volume control over here. Okay. We will call the June 14th meeting of the Caroline County Board of Supervisors to order. Let the record show that all board members are present. Representing the Reedy Church District is Mr. Underwood. Representing the Fort Royal District is Mr. Popowitz. Representing Bowling Green is Mr. Seeley. Representing Madison is Mr. Akers. And I'm Floyd Thomas representing Mattapanai. At this point, I'll ask Mr. Akers if he would deliver the invocation.
Thank you. Let us stand, please. Heavenly Father, as we have come together as a board tonight to do the business of this county, we ask for your true guidance, we ask for your decision-making, and we ask for your wisdom in all that we do and all that we say, and that all that we do and all that we say will be pleasing in your sight and what is best for the people of this county. Lord, we thank you for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us as a county and as individuals, and we'll always give you the praise and the honor and glory for it all. For it is your precious and wonderful name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Now if you'll join for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mr. Pardon, do we at this time have any amendments to the agenda?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Opening board comments, Mr. Underwood. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say thank you to the James Group. They held a concert at the fairground in honor of our troops during Memorial Day holiday. It was a fundraiser for, not only for that, but for the fight against the Lou Gehrig disease. So there was I want to say thank you to them for hosting such a wonderful event. Also, I'd like to extend a thank you to Mr. Curry Roberts and the people from the State Fair. We had a tour last week. I think Mr. Pardon and Mr. Fincham were there. Good opportunity to talk about our partnership and how we work together for the betterment of the county. So those are my comments. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Underwood. Mr. Popowitz?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Seeley?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Akers?
No, sir, no comments. Thank you.
Okay, just one for me. As you know, the county participated with the town of Bowling Green to commemorate the 70th anniversary of AP Hill over the weekend. So I think that was a great event. And also at our last meeting, the board said we would provide a resolution to the Loving Day Committee that's now been run out of New York to commemorate the marriage of Richard and Mildred Loving, and both of those were done. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to agenda item number 1. Presentations and reports, a review of the recent water supply emergency in Caroline. Mr. Schiebel, I imagine that's you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. First, hopefully you all can hear really well. I'd like to thank Mr. Beal sitting in the back. From the audience side, this sounds really good. We can hear everything that's going on. I can hear all the board members' comments, and hopefully you all can hear the same, because this sounds really good from this end. As you're aware, the public utilities water system experienced a crisis over the Memorial Day weekend due to a failure of the Petro pump. This caused a failure that was attributed to the screening issue that allowed small stones to enter the pump, which caused a catastrophic failure of that pump. This well is the county's largest yielding production well. In addition, this was the largest water demand weekend in any given year, as well as the unseasonably hot weather. This event has been tagged as the perfect storm, or as the not so perfect storm. As a result of the peak demand and the loss of our largest production well, the water pressure dropped dramatically and service interruptions in outlying areas of the water system occurred. This situation required imposing level 6 emergency restrictions, the highest level water restrictions available. In addition, a boil water notice was issued as a precautionary measure due to the low pressure in the system. The Petro well was placed back into service on June 2nd, and the system began to recover and filling of the water storage tanks. On June 8th, the water restrictions had been reduced to a level 3 moderate level, which is where we still stand today. The Bull notice that we issued was lifted on June 1 with the test results confirming that there were no health risks that ever existed to our customers. Staff did an exceptional job responding to the emergency. The EOC was open to inform and protect the public of the water emergency at hand. A coordinated effort by Fire and Rescue, the Sheriff's Office, and the public utility turned this event from an emergency into an incident. I'd like to thank Fire Chief Dave Lehman, as well as Sheriff Tony Lippo, for their involvement in assisting the utility department getting notification out during that event. Staff is evaluating our response to this situation and focusing on the ways to prevent similar occurrences in the future and identifying any lessons learned from this experience. One of the factors that slowed our ability to get the Petro well back online quickly was the lack of a replacement pump, as each well has its own set of specifications when it comes to gallons per minute, head, pump curve, power requirements, and so forth. A replacement pump for each well is not practical. These pumps typically have a 10 to 15-year life. Staff is pricing a well pump that will work on both the Petro well and the Days Inn well that will allow a productive use while repairs are affected to the pumps as they're being completed. Another area being reviewed is the protocol for instituting emergency restrictions on water usage once a crisis has been identified. It is important to get mandatory water restrictions in place as soon as possible to slow water usage. Staff believes clear protocols and guidelines can be established by working through the drought response and contingency plan identified in the regional water supply plan. These two new tools in the public utilities toolbox will enable the utilities department to ward off future system failures. Future items to be discussed are the water supply plan, which we'll discuss tonight, wholesale water purchase option study, we're hoping to have before you July 12th, well production green sand filters at a future board work session. I'd like to thank the Board of Supervisors for their support as we work through these issues. And we've also attached a timeline of events that took place during this event from start to finish. I'll be glad to answer any board members' questions at this time.
Okay, before we go to questions, Mr. Shebel, would you once again repeat those important dates again? July?
Yes, sir. The water supply plan will be presented tonight, directly after this. Wholesale water purchase option study, July 12th board meeting. And we are hoping, once we have those, to schedule a work session to talk about the well production green sand filters projects, along with the other two, as they really go hand in hand of how we move forward from here.
Okay. Thank you, sir. There were some questions in our work session about sand filters, and I imagine now would be time if you'd like to address those. So questions of Mr. Shebel at this time? Mr. Underwood? Ms. Popowitz?
Yes. Mr. Shebel, I asked Mr. Parton, I don't know if he's talked to you about looking at the damaged pump.
Yes, sir.
And possibly repairing that as a spare at some point.
We did look at that. However, the pump couldn't be replaced. It couldn't be repaired.
Couldn't be repaired.
Yeah, we looked at that. It was one of the things we thought of, as well as the motor. It actually comes as two separate units.
Okay.
But the motor was also damaged as well.
Okay, so the cost would have been prohibitive then, I take it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it far exceeded 50% of the cost to replace it, and the motor itself couldn't have been rebuilt. But the cost to work on that pump, to fix that, to put that back in, wasn't worth the investment.
Okay, okay. The other thing is, Atlantic Pump and Equipment.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a service contract with them?
We do not.
We do not. Can we go ahead, if it pleases the board, can we go ahead and start looking at a possibility of doing that, something that we might be able to get a better response from them, especially during an emergency?
We talked to them. I mean, we had them on the phone Monday morning when that project happened. I mean, we've got constant contact. They work hand in hand with us. Without a pump in place, there was nothing that could do to be coming up.
I understand, Mr. Shebel. I'd still like to see us take a look at that and see if there's some things that we can do with some of our other systems. The other thing is the stuff with the screening. We were going to go ahead and replace, I guess, pull that pump anyway after the holiday.
That's correct. The actual pump itself, I mean, the pump it's no good. We pulled the pump out. That well is actually, most wells are directionally horizontal up and down. With this one here, it actually comes down and starts angling on us. So the pump almost, it doesn't literally lay on its side, but it lays in there at an angle. Mm-hmm. And the pump that was in there originally was a larger pump. And only allowed for about 3/4 of an inch for the pump to slide into the well itself. So the pump that's in there now is a smaller pump that can actually pump the production of the well and allows us to have the extra room. There was a concern if we were to pull the pump. We were trying to thinking about pulling it on Friday. However, there was a concern if we pulled that pump on Friday that we would damage it enough that we wouldn't be able to put it back into the hole, and then we would have been in almost the same situation. So it was determined to try to see if we could make it through the holiday weekend, and then on Tuesday we had lined up to have Atlantic come up and pull that pump then and see where we were at.
Okay. So we are working on a contingency, though, so that we have some redundancy in the system now?
That's correct. We've been pricing a replacement well pump that'll actually fit in that well as the Days Inn well. Okay. That way we've got the one pump that'll fit in 2 different holes. The rest of the wells, we actually have a pump that we can put into any of the other well sites now, so we did have that one. However, it was such a small well for the Petro well. Just the timing of that, as our system on Friday was full, we entered into the largest production or demand weekend. You know, when it got to Monday, we were on the low side of our capacity, and then with the extra demand on the system from the heat, and then the largest pump going down, you know, we were just in that critical state.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chief.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Before Mr. Seeley, Mr. Schiebel, during your presentation, you did mention the fact that we had ordered this replacement pump on Friday.
That's correct. We did.
Just so happened didn't come until Tuesday or
Wednesday. I mean, you've got, these are specially made pumps. The pump it's made. So Wednesday, if you look at the timeline date, we noticed that we were picking up some rocks in the filter. And on the following day, Tuesday, we noticed we still were getting some. We had Atlantic Pump on there saying, hey, what do you think the problem is? You know, this isn't typical. We've never had this. They said, we've never seen this in our 40-some years either. So we started thinking it was a screen problem right off the bat. Why the screen went bad is still kind of the unknown, other than the way the pump lays on its side and could have been vibrating in there, could have actually worn the holes in that screen the way it sits in there. So the pump, we made the decision on Friday when we found out we were getting rocks again, that we needed to get a replacement pump ordered so that we would have that on hand to be able to put in when we pulled that pump on Tuesday.
All right, Mr. Seeley, I understand, has several questions.
My first question is that in our budget for next year, we have a sand filter in, and I know that we currently have money in the budget for a sand filter for Carmel Church.
Yes, sir.
Which we've not yet installed. Is that true?
That's correct.
Are we close to installing it? I mean, where are we with that?
Currently, we borrowed $1 million to install green sand filters in Carmel Church. With that would enable us to treat the Days Inn well, the new Days Inn well, the new Econo Lodge well, the replacement Econo Lodge well, and then one additional well. At this time, we had to make one more submission to the state to get that. And if we actually were go through the total procurement process of advertising the project, bidding it out, awarding contract, and then construction, we're probably looking at a 6 to 9 month window. So that was putting us into the latter part of, or the beginning of actually next year before it would even be completed. So with that part is one separate part to give us some additional production capabilities. The $1.8 million was to take care of the 3 wells that we currently have drilled in the Ladysmith area and to drill a 4th well. At that time, that was really the county's solution to move forward for water. During that time, we have moved forward with a wholesale water option study that we'll bring before you next month. And there was a discussion among staff of investing $3 million in the ground today that we could put towards possibly putting an infrastructure of water lines to another locality that would then be able to provide our immediate, midterm, and possibly even a long-term solution to Caroline County. So the decision was made to slow that down. Let's see where the discussions go and what the board would be amenable to before we invested $3 million and essentially in a year and a half to 2 years would be almost useless at that point to us.
Do we have to do the green sand filters for the wells that we currently have?
For the new wells that we've drilled, all the other wells are either exempt because they met the standard when they were drilled. The state has since reduced their standards on iron and manganese, and our new wells can't meet those. For instance, our old Econo Lodge well has the same water quality as the new Econo Lodge well we just drilled. we were able to operate the old well under the grandfather clause. The new well, that's very similar in its characteristics, we're unable to operate without putting green sand filters on. So any of the new wells that we have drilled, which are the 3 that we have drilled in Ladysmith and the 3 that we have drilled in Carmel Church, all need treatment.
Are we using any of those now?
We're currently, Virginia Department of Health has allowed us to use the new Days Inn well. As we took on the Ladysmith Water Company and the residents in Lake Caroline, they allowed us to use that well, knowing that we were moving forward to a treatment process to be able to put in place.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Seeley. Mr. Akers? Okay. Mr. Shebel, just to make sure, we're saying as a board, we're saying move forward with the sand filters in Carmel Church and move forward with the sand filters in Ladysmith based on our budget proposals to ensure a redundancy and additional capacity.
Okay, that's what's in the budget. Again, it was put forth in the budget for that $1.8 million for Ladysmith.
Right.
Again, that was done prior to us looking at this wholesale water purchase agreement.
Right.
That really appears that it's going to be very amenable to the county, and we need to take a serious look at that. However, we do need to look at having redundancy in our system.
Right.
I think we need to look at the Carmel Church system and maybe a well in the Ladysmith system. Staff has been looking at a small package type system that we can bring in to treat some of the individual wells, and I'll have a better handle of that for our work session, that we might be able to treat some of these individual wells individually than trying to do them wholly. The current system, it'll last us 20 years when we put a green sand filter in, other than maintenance. The system that we're looking at is really a kind of a very interim type thing to get us through. So once we have a good feeling for what the board wants to do, and if they're interested in looking at the wholesale water purchase option, then we know whether to invest the $3 million now for the long term, or whether we need to go with something very interim to get us by until we can get to a wholesale purchase agreement.
And we're gonna plan now to move forward with the sand filters, and then July we'll get the water study back, and then we'll have a work session in that period of time to kind of figure out long-range strategy. There may be some other factors that come into play, but if we don't have a wholesale water purchase option, this would allow us to keep going.
That's correct.
And we'd at least like to be self-sufficient in case that doesn't happen. So
Yes, sir.
I think that's it. That covers the first issue, and now we're going to discuss the regional water supply plan with the town of Bowling Green, and that's one of the things the county has done.
If I may, to clarify, at this point you want me to start design on the green sand filters in Ladysmith? Is that what I understood, or are we going to borrow the money first?
Mr. Chairman, if I could suggest, I think there may be additional information that we can bring back that we're exploring. Perhaps there are cheaper options out there available that we had not looked at before for sand filters. We don't necessarily know at this point, but we would like to explore that further and then bring all that information back to be discussed at the work session.
Okay.
And then the board will be operating from a much more informed point of view about what the possibilities are. Talk about the issues in totality at that point.
That sounds fair.
And, you know, we would expect that to happen in July, so there's a sense of urgency in bringing that forward.
That's the message we wanted to make sure we passed along, is there was a sense of urgency to keep
Yes,
looking.
sir.
And if you're going to do some things in Mr. Parton's direction, I will take my cue from him then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shebel.
First
Okay.
thing I'd like to do is hand out these handouts.
Hand out the handouts.
You can just give it to me, I'll pass it down. That's fair.
And Pam, if you could key the projector as well. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening again. Tonight, we'll be discussing the regional water supply plan. In the summer of 2002, the state of Virginia experienced a severe drought, and as a result, the Virginia General Assembly mandated in 9 VAC 25 through 780 9-10 through 9 VAC 25-780 through 190, that the development of a local and regional water supply plan be made throughout the Commonwealth. The State Water Control Board developed regulations and implemented this plan process that will be reviewed by the Department of Environmental Quality. The Regional Water Supply Plan was developed between Caroline County and the town of Bowling Green. Based upon these regulations, Caroline County and the town of Bowling Green are required to complete a water supply plan that fulfills this regulation by November 2 of this year. It was deemed that with both reasonable and practical for us to coordinate and collaborate in the development of a regional water supply plan. This is a sensible approach to developing the plan since watershed boundaries and aquifers do not follow political boundaries and since there was a cost savings to both jurisdictions. The purpose of this plan is to aid in the development of a water supply plan that will help to ensure that the residents are adequately provided safe drinking water and assist in the future development of water supply projects necessary to meet the county's and the town's future requirement. The following are elements included in this plan: a description of existing water sources, a description of existing water uses, a description of existing water resource conditions, an assessment of projected water demand, a description of water management actions, a statement of need, alternative analysis identifying potential alternative sources, and maps identifying these areas. A public hearing and adoption of the resolution approving the plan will be required. Staff will begin working on the water supply plan in 2009 by collecting the information on existing water sources. Caroline County was able to secure 2 separate grants in the development of this plan, the first in the amount of $8,000, the second in the amount of $4,000. The county then enlisted W&W Associates to come in and help us develop the actual plan. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Herb White with W&W Associates. Mr. White.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we're going to move right into the water supply plan and try to summarize that document. This was a list of the items that are in the plan, and I think Joey just read that list, so I'm not going to repeat those, but we're going to go through all those elements as we move forward with the discussion. Existing water sources, as far as the community water systems, they would include the Caroline County utility system. That would be Lady Smith, Carmel Church, as well as the Milford Sanitary District. And then the town of Bowling Green has its own water system. There are also non-agricultural self-supplied users. We'll discuss that, as well as agricultural self-supplied users. As far as this presentation is concerned, we tried to focus mostly on community water systems because that's what's most important to the county, as well as the non-agricultural self-supplied. This is the permitted capacity that is enlisted by the Virginia Department of Health relative to well capacities. They show the permitted capacity as well as average and maximum daily withdrawals. This typically is generated from, for groundwater sources, a pump test that's done when a well is drilled. And it's a little bit misleading because typically a well produces the most water it's going to produce the day you do that pump test, and then it starts dwindling beyond that. So you end up getting permitted capacities that are in excess typically of what can be produced out of a well. This is existing water use. This is data that we derived in 2008 based on data generated by the county. Again, permitted use, average use, and peak day use. I'd like to point out from looking at this one, you'll notice that the average day to the peak day is about a factor of 2. That's typical in most water systems because when you have that peak day, perfect storm on Memorial Day or Labor Day, you got to put the water in the system, and it's typically a lot more than you're going to see at, let's say, February, because there's a whole lot less consumptive use of water. As far as non-ag users, the high school, AP Hill are 2 of the primary users, and you can see the total average consumptions for those, as well as the permitted use. It's a little pie chart that shows you something that's just an interesting perspective.
As far as community water system, public use is approximately 13% of all consumptive uses within the county. You'll see that agricultural use is 41%, and other self-supplied users, which would be rural areas using groundwater sources mostly. That just gives you a good perspective on where the consumptive uses are going. Moving into water demand management, one of the first strategies would be water conservation, which I think the county does in fact have a drought management plan which focuses on conservation. A focus on maintaining a balance between supply and demand, and this would include efficient use, using efficient fixtures in housing and in plumbing codes, use reduction, as well as loss and leakage reduction in your piping systems. This is most important during periods of drought, and I think the county has experienced this over the last several years. Drought response and contingency planning. What we're doing here is trying to come up with a management strategy to analyze where your well capacities are relative to supply versus the demand. And if you have a reservoir, this is normally done by elevation triggers. When the reservoir is half empty as opposed to 2/3 empty, those are triggers. In this case, we set up this scheme based on production of your wells. We know what the hard capacity of your wells are, and when you're 95% using all the water that you can put out of your wells, you're at a level 5. We do recognize the county has a drought management ordinance, and that is in this water supply plan as a document reference, and is required by water supply planning that the DEQ set forth. As far as projecting water demands into the future, the planning period for the water supply plan is target year 2050. We know the population growth based on Virginia Employment Commission and other sources ranges in the 1.9 to 2.9% growth factors for just raw county population. Having said that, we estimate that 75% of that growth will be in the designated growth areas in accordance with your comprehensive plan. So by doing that, we end up with demand factors within your growth areas that are significantly higher than the countywide population. And we have projected those, and they tend to taper off over time as far as the projections. We have got DEQ's buy-in on this methodology for these factors. By doing that, we can project the demands. This graphic's not very good. Total disaggregate water demand by category. Can't hardly read that one, so I think we'll move to the next one because I think it's a little more explanatory. Non-agricultural self-supplied users. The red line would be, I guess, AP Hill, and the blue line is Caroline County High School, just to give you an idea of what those growth factors would be. Here we start looking at average daily demand projections, and what you'll see is the community water systems. Right now, I guess in 2010 we're at 1.2, but in 2050 we're pushing upwards of 3 million gallons per day, which is a significant growth factor. This is done in a numerical table, and this is part of the DEQ's requirement to identify it based on deficit. And if you'll notice, in year 2050, there is a deficit, and this is a peak day, not an average day, of 4.5 NGD, which just shows you we've got to do some planning to get to the future. Projected needs from 2010 to 2050. The green line is projected peak day demand, which is our target for design. If you look at the red line, which is the Virginia Department of Health's future permit capacity, or future and current permit capacity, the demand significantly outstrips the current capacity within the county system. And in fact, if you look at 2010, we're right at capacity as of today, and I think that's one of the discussions y'all were having a minute ago. Milford, we did the same thing, and you'll see we're at or near capacity right now, and the growth factors grow significantly over the future.
Can you go back a second?
Yes, sir. So what you see there is blue line's average, green line's peak, and red line is current permitted capacity.
So you're saying peak demand right now for Milford is at capacity,
Yes, sir.
but the average is still below capacity?
Average is still good to go. That's right. So on the hottest day of the year, your system's wide open.
Okay.
This is a summary of the total need for the county as well as the town of Bowling Green, just again, a numerical summation of each of those categories. And by looking at that, I guess the current is 4.6 million and the future 2050 is 7.8. This is on an average for all users. But again, we're trying to focus more on the community water systems. Now we'll move into the alternative analysis. As far as matching the future needs of the water system, first we mentioned water conservation. We've talked about that. Further groundwater development, I think the board was discussing this a minute ago, possibly green sand filters in Lady Smith as well as Carmel Church and other groundwater resources. I will say here we feel like those are short-term solutions. Best a well ever is the day you drill it. It starts dwindling over time, and it is not as reliable a resource as some other options. Joey mentioned interconnections to other localities. The report addresses where these connections could be. We could tie Milford to the town of Bowling Green, AP Hill to the town of Bowling Green, run an extension up 207-301 to connect Bowling Green to Carmel Church. There's potential connections to Hanover County, City of Richmond, as well as Spotsylvania County. And then for a longer-term solution, I know the county has been working on a raw water intake on the Rappahannock River. It's 5 miles northwest of Port Royal, and I believe the joint permit application that was applied for requested somewhere between 7 and 11 million gallons per day. And this was a graphic that's in the report that shows potential routes of where this water plant is and how it connects back to the system. Biggest drawbacks here, other than getting the permit and building a water plant, would be the significantly long runs of pipe it would take to hook all this network together. So there's some cost implications associated with that graphic. To summarize...
I'm sorry.
Sure.
One more time. Can you go back again?
Okay.
And it's not your fault, but it takes me a while to focus.
Okay.
The green line at the top is actually Route 2
Those are
coming down?
two different routes. There's a blue route and a green route, or two alternative routes.
But the green route that's running vertical from top to bottom is Route 2, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Correct, yes, sir. So I know I gave you a whole bunch of numbers on a whole bunch of charts, but I tried to boil that down back to the community water system. And we feel like there's a pushing 3 MGD peak daily deficit in the Caroline system by the year 2050. We feel like that there's going to be the need to push both short-term and long-term strategies to meet this demand, including conservation, developing groundwater resources, as well as surface water resources, and potentially interconnections to other localities. And that's the short form of this document. There's a whole lot more information in there, but I think as far as the community water system is concerned, that's a summary of it.
Mr. White, thank you very much. Mr. Schiebel, if you will. Board members at this time have any questions for Mr. Schiebel or Mr. White? Ms. Popowitz?
Yes. Yes. Had one question. You mentioned Spotsylvania as a possibility in Section 8 as a partner with our water intake for the river. Do we know how far their closest reservoir is from that intake?
I'm not sure about the reservoir, but I think their water system's about 7 miles from Ladysmith. Am I right?
Port
About 7 miles.
With the Port Royal.
Port Royal going up, right.
Port Royal intake over there, where we were planning to do the intake for the river.
Yeah, it's up at Tidewater Trail, where they've got water there. That'd probably be the nearest point to our line, coming down at 17 and right at the intersection there at New Post.
Do you know where their nearest treatment center is over there?
I don't.
Yeah. And just, I know we're going to probably talk about this later, but my thought process being is that line coming all the way from 17 without any customer base on it would not be a feasible thing for us to do. But if we could get them to treat our raw water and give us capacity back, that might be another option we look at. So just some food for thought, and it gives us some leverage in talking to them as well. One other question was, I noticed in here that I think, Mr. Parton, we've had discussions with Hanover County. Is that right, Mr. Schiebel?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right. We were talking to Richmond at one time directly. What has happened to that relationship? Is it deteriorated, or what's going on with that?
No, I mean, the 3 water options that the county have looked at and been negotiating with and trying to come up with, feasibility of the cost to do that with staff. We've talked with the city of Richmond, Hanover, and Spotsylvania, the 3 options that we'll be bringing forth to the board at your next meeting, and review that in depth with you all.
Yeah, but there's no strained relationship with Richmond or anything like that? They're not?
No, sir.
Okay, so we're still good there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was all right.
Yeah,
All right. That's all the questions I had, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Popowitz. Any other questions? Ms. Sealy? Ms. Akers?
I do. AP Hill, that is one of the things that you've shown up here. What is the possibility, and I know probably a couple of years ago, a private company took over the AP Hill water system, I believe, and maybe the sewer system as well, I'm not sure. I know the water system. They own wells completely at AP Hill, or do they have any type of reservoir over there?
No, they're completely wells.
So they're in no better shape than we are.
They do have a fair amount of hard capacity. They got a lot of pumping capacity.
They do.
They do.
We've talked to them. They've got about 1.8 million gallons of reserve capacity that they had when they put in the wells for the Jamboree that they no longer use. And I've talked with the company over there about that and how we might transition from there through the Bowling Green system to our Milford system to Poorhouse system to the county system, and how we might go about doing that. So that's something that we've looked at, and really it's once we get down to revisiting our water master plan, which is really where we need to be going. We've kind of really put the cart before the horse. Really it would have made his job easier if he had a water master plan to do this, as well as any of the stuff we've been doing on a wholesale water purchase study. If we had had that in place to say, all right, here's where we need to go, here's how we're trying to go to do that. But that's something that we're definitely looking at, of possibly how to get water from there.
Okay, I think it's something we need to really, it's probably going to be the least or the most efficient for the county, cost-wise, because they're so close to us and to our system. So I think we need to really pursue that.
They're actually the longest, Mr.
Aggressively.
Eckers, when you try to get to Carmel Church or Ladysmith.
I'm sorry?
They're actually the longest when you actually try to get to Carmel Church or Ladysmith, where our primary growth area is.
How about Milford? I mean, how about Milford? Can we
Milford,
tie it all in together?
Absolutely. That was one of the things. We haven't actually sat down with the town of Bowling Green to talk about that, but we do have an interconnection in the Milford line right at the town line where we could interconnect very easily there, purchase water from them. They do have some additional capacity. But again, we could also, they're getting ready to run a water line out 301 towards AP Hill. So there's a possibility that we could do a pass-through through the town of Bowling Green and work out an agreement with them and AP Hill or the water company there to move water into the Milford system. And that's really what we were looking at to be able to do that. As you know, the board has previously approved a development there that we're limited on how many homes they can actually build due to the availability of the water supply. There's other development that possibly could come that we could definitely use that system instead of trying to bring a line from Carmel Church all the way to Bowling Green.
Okay, I just would say that if we need to pursue that avenue aggressively, number one. And number two, if we you know, I know that Northern Virginia years ago, they basically said to Caroline County, we're going to go through the Congress and make sure that we get land to build